What if I told you there is a seed that carries more protein than beef? It thrives in heat that turns corn to dust. It grows with almost no water, and for 5,000 years, it was the engine of civilizations in the hottest deserts on Earth. Then, in less than a century, we erased it. We replaced it with weaker crops, buried its name, and let it vanish from our fields. But beneath the soil, something was waiting. It didn't die. It slept. This is the story of the crop we threw away just before we needed it most. Welcome to Nature Lost Vault. Before we open this vault, if these stories matter to you, the best way to preserve this wisdom is simple. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share these vaults with those who need to remember what we forgot. The archive opens in the Tahahuacan Valley, Mexico, an archaeological site dated to 500 BCE. Inside ancient storage pits, researchers found seeds perfectly preserved for 2,500 years. But the story goes back even further. Genetic analysis in 2021 revealed the seed was domesticated 5,000 years ago in a single brilliant event in the Sonoran Desert. The people who cultivated it had no written language, but they possessed a wisdom we have lost. In a land where survival meant choosing what to plant first, they chose this bean before the grain. Not for sentiment, for survival. This is the temporary bean, scientifically known as Phaseolus acutapaglias. It was engineered by evolution for one purpose: to live where nothing else could. Its genome is a fortress. It produces special amino sugars that prevent its proteins from breaking down, even when the air temperature reaches 118 F. When the rains fail, its leaves fold up during the day to save water, opening only at night. It fixes nitrogen from the air, healing dead soil, and it produces more protein per ounce than beef, up to 25 grams per 100 grams of bean. The Tuno people called it tapawi. Simply, it is a bean, but their oral tradition tells a deeper story. They say the Milky Way is not made of stars. It is made of white temporary beans scattered across the night sky. That is how abundant it was. By 1,000 years ago, the Hokum people were cultivating it throughout Arizona using a method that defies modern logic. They planted them in Aoso, dry washes that flooded briefly during monsoon rains. They built brush diversion structures to catch the flash floods. The beans germinated with a single rain and matured in just 60 days. 2 monsoon rains, 1 full harvest. In regions where rainfall was just 3 in annually, the temporary beans still produced. By the 1920s, Tohono O'odham farmers were growing 1.5 million pounds of temporary beans per year. They traded them across the Southwest, a network linking Arizona, Sonora, and the Great Plains. The bean sustained entire communities through drought, through famine, through impossible heat, and it kept them healthy. Before processed foods arrived, the Tohono O'odham had virtually no incidence of type 2 diabetes. Their traditional diet of temporary beans, masquet pods, and colubuts maintained healthy cholesterol and balanced blood sugar naturally. The temporary bean was key. Its soluble fiber slowed digestion. Its low glycemic index made it ideal for metabolic health. Modern research would later confirm something else extraordinary. Temporary beans contain protease inhibitors that inhibit the growth of certain cancer cells. This was not just food, it was preventative medicine growing freely in the sand. So how did a crop this powerful vanish? It was not nature that killed it. It was ideology. The first blow struck in the 1600s. Spanish Franciscan friars established dozens of missions along the Rio Grande. Their objective was threefold: convert the natives, pacify the land, and extract resources. The missions brought wheat, barley, and European cattle. Native farmers were told to plant wheat for church tithes. Temporary beans, wild, uncontrollable, requiring no European input, had no place in that system. A Jesuit journal from 1694 described the crop as too wild to control. That line says everything. A plant that grew without irrigation, without ownership, without dependence was a threat to the colonial order. Fields growing temporary beans were replaced or burned. The irony is tragic. Those European crops failed during long droughts while the terry could have kept them alive. But the bean, like the mosquite tree, does not surrender easily. Seeds stayed buried in the soil, sleeping through centuries, waiting for their turn to rise. By the 1930s, a new eraser began. This time, the weapon was not fire or religion. It was mechanization. The 1920s had been a golden age of cultivation, but World War II changed the landscape. Farmers left to work for wages on large-scale cotton farms driven by well irrigation. These new farms ran on machines, mechanical harvesters, tractors, and industrial monoculture. Temporary beans were labor-intensive. Their pods matured at different times and had to be picked by hand. If you waited too long, the pods would shatter, spilling the beans onto the ground. A survival mechanism for the wild, but a nightmare for the machine. In a system built for speed and uniformity, the temporary had no place. Government subsidies flowed to corn, soy, and cotton, crops that fed livestock, not people. By the 1950s, the temporary bean was nearly extinct. A crop that had sustained 5,000 years of civilization disappeared into decades. But a handful of families refused to forget. Ramona Button of Ramona Farms discovered a few black peppery beans saved in an old trunk. Seeds that should have been lost were kept like heirlooms tucked away in clay jars, hidden in basements, passed down with whispered instructions. The bean was waiting for the world to need it again. That moment came in the 1970s. Global droughts hit hard. Soybeans dropped in yield. Corn struggled to pollinate under relentless heat. Even wheat, the colonial crop that replaced the temporary, showed weakness under the 110 Fahrenheit sun. Farmers in the American Southwest were desperate. Agricultural researchers began testing wild plants that still thrived in desert soil. What they found surprised everyone. A vine with small white blossoms growing strong at 115F. They tested it in plots near Tucson and Sonora. Even with almost no irrigation, it produced a full crop. The plant was the terrier bean. Alive and well after 4 centuries of erasure, scientists measured nitrogen levels in the soil after harvest. They were higher than before planting. The plant literally healed the dirt it grew in. A USDA researcher named Dr. Howard Scott called it a gift from the past to the future. They compared it to soybeans. The temper gave 20 to 25% protein, resisted pests naturally, and needed 1/3 the water. It wasn't a relic. It was a survivor designed for extremes. But survival alone doesn't guarantee a comeback. The temper had everything big agriculture claimed to want: high yield, drought resistance, natural soil recovery. But there was one problem. It refused to belong to anyone. You couldn't patent it. You couldn't modify it genetically. You couldn't sell expensive fertilizer alongside it. It didn't need them, and that made it invisible in a system built around control. Agricultural journals labeled it unsuitable for commercial production. Even while research papers praised its climate strength, in simpler terms, it wasn't profitable and profit beat survival every time. But a few people refused to accept that. Around 1996, a community group called Tohono O'odham Community Action TOA began collecting ancient seed lines from elders and forgotten storage jars. Each variety had its own name, flavor, and story. Some had not been grown for more than 300 years. Farmers like Terrell Dew Johnson and Sterling Johnson worked by hand. No machines, no chemicals, just desert soil and memory. They called it planting the ancestors. By the early 2000s, they harvested enough to feed families and sell small bags to local schools. The beans turned up in traditional stews, tortillas, and bread. Elders said the flavor tasted like the desert itself. Kids who had grown up on store-bought food learned how to plant, soak, and cook the same beans their great-grandparents carried through dry seasons. Every seed represented survival. Toker eventually built a food co-op and partnered with universities to share data, proving the tur could grow with 75% less water than modern beans. But the revival went beyond food. It restored identity. Farmers said growing it felt like remembering who we were before the drought. As the crops began to spread again across the Southwest, scientists started paying attention. Today, climate models warn that over 30% of global crop yields could fall by 250 because of rising heat. Yet, the temporary bean has already lived through worse. It was born from heat in fields where corn and soy wither. The temporary stays green, setting pods even at 115. Scientists now call it America's survival crop. In 2019, university trials in Arizona and Mexico confirmed what desert farmers always knew. Temporary beans use less than a third the water of soybeans while producing nearly equal protein. That means they could feed families where rainfall barely touches the soil. The International Center for Tropical Agriculture in Colombia is now testing crossbreeds of terry and common beans to impart drought and heat resistance to global food systems. This research confirmed the farmers' knowledge. Governments have started testing it for food security programs, but the real momentum is coming from indigenous farmers. They see it as more than a crop. It is a bridge between the past and the planet's uncertain future. As one elder told researchers, we grow it because it remembers how to live when everything else forgets. The story of the temporary bean is not about rediscovery, it is about recognition. The knowledge was never lost, only ignored. And now, while the world spends billions searching for drought-proof seeds, the answer has been waiting in the desert for 5,000 years. The bean that clothed itself in scarcity, that fed armies of heat, that survived missions, mechanization, and corporate erasure, it never stopped offering its gifts. It simply waited for us to remember. This knowledge is not lost. It is buried in every seed, every pod, every harvest. The crop we called backward may be the future of survival. All it asks is that we look past profit and see what was always there. Resilience growing in the sand. If this vault opens something for you, subscribe to Nutritious Vault and hit the bell. Every like and every share helps preserve this wisdom. The knowledge was never lost, only ignored. And now, while the world spends billions engineering drought-resistant crops and carbon capture machines, the answer has been waiting in the ditch by the side of the road. The plant that fed humanity 12 months a year. The plant that survived the drainage of 65 million acres. It never stopped offering its gifts. It simply waited for us to remember. This knowledge is not lost. It grows in every marsh, every riverbank, every pond edge. The plant we called a weed may be the future of survival. All it asks is that we look past the profit of the plow and see what was always there. The supermarket of the swamp. If this vault opens something for you, subscribe to Nutritious Vault and hit the bell. Every like and every share helps preserve this wisdom together.